Greetings and welcome to another series of weekly devotionals where we take a look at one of the lectionary readings for the upcoming week and offer a few thoughts for reflection and meditation. And this week we're going to look at a passage in the first chapter of the book of the prophet Isaiah. And I remember when I first took some classes on the books of the prophets, and I wasn't really crazy about the prophets. It sounded like a lot of fire and brimstone type language, a lot of angry warnings and very repetitive warnings, and it didn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense to me reading these books. But of course, as I took these classes, they kind of opened up the books of the prophets for me a little bit, helped to shed some light and understanding on what they meant and why they were written. And of course, the important, one of the most important aspects of that learning process was learning the context of those passages. When were they written? To whom were they written? Why were they written? What was the context? And of course, as the book opens, the book of the prophet Isaiah, the context is that the people of Israel have been conquered by the Assyrians, and so the people are they're in a bit of dire straits. They're going through quite a bit, and Isaiah alludes to this when he writes to them, "Hear the words of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Listen to the teaching of our God, you people of Gomorrah." And if you read the Bible at all, you might realize that those references to Sodom and Gomorrah are references to ancient cities that were destroyed, that fell into destruction because they veered away from following the ways of God. And that is Isaiah's warning to the people of Israel as well, that their present state is the result of their falling away from God. And if they don't turn back to God, they are risking their very destruction. And, when I first read the books of the prophets, it didn't seem to really resonate with me. But the older I get, and certainly in the time and place in which we now live, there are many situations, circumstances that sort of remind me of the dire straits of those people of Israel back in Isaiah's day. We have the threat of climate change, and it seems that governments are just unwilling to do anything about it. And of course, the specter of gun violence over and over and over again, and it just seems a never-ending cycle of violence. And of course, in our very polarized political climate, it seems there are threats to women's rights and the rights of LGBTQ folks and human rights in general. And so in our time and place, I think we can very much identify with the situation of the people of Israel back in Isaiah's day, and maybe hear Isaiah's words a little bit differently. And we might wonder, what might it take for us to really do something about all of these various situations that we find ourselves in. I'm reminded of a story, one of my favorite movies, Hotel Rwanda, a movie that came out in the early 90s, and it tells the story of a hotel manager who, during the genocide in Rwanda in the early 90s, risked his life to courageously hide a bunch of refugees in his hotel. And there's a scene in that movie where the United Nations comes in and reporters from the West start reporting on the story. And he is really encouraged and emboldened because he says to one of the United Nations workers, now that the people in America are going to know about what's going on here, the terrible atrocities that are going on, they're going to have to do something about it. And the United Nations worker says to him, I hate to burst your bubble, but the folks in America are going to watch this on the news while they're having their dinner, they're going to say, "Oh, that's terrible," and then they're going to go back to eating their dinner. And I think that is kind of our response sometimes to these problems. We wring our hands and say, "Oh, that's terrible," but I think the words of the prophets encourage the people of God to actually do something about it. And so, my thought for today is to consider what might what might that word be that would actually get us to work toward change, toward trying to live more in following the ways of God and not the ways of violence and destruction. Amen.